The air in the alien prison was cold and heavy, carrying the smell of metal and damp stone. Dim blue lights flickered along the walls, casting long shadows that moved like ghosts with every spark of failing power. The sound of dripping water echoed somewhere far down the corridor, slow and steady, like the ticking of a broken clock. Captain Elias Kane was pushed forward by two alien guards, with rough hands and rougher voices. Their skin was dark green with patterns that looked like scales, their eyes narrow and glowing yellow in the dim light. They spoke in a language Elias did not understand. Sharp and harsh, but the tone told him it was not friendly. They shoved him into a small cell, the heavy door closing with a deep metallic clang that seemed to swallow the air. The walls were made of strange black stone with lines of glowing blue running through them like veins, and there was nothing inside but a metal bench fixed to the wall. Elias sat down, breathing slowly, trying to keep his mind calm. From across the corridor came a faint sound, a soft and broken cry. It was not human. There was something different in the voice, like a faint echo. Elias looked through the narrow bars of his cell and saw her. She was small and thin, her skin pale with a faint silver glow that seemed to shimmer under the prison lights. Her hair was white and fell in tangled strands over her face. Her wrists and ankles were shackled with heavy metal cuffs that left red marks on her skin. She sat on the floor with her knees pulled close, trembling as if the cold was inside her bones. Two alien guards stood near her, holding long rods that crackled with blue sparks at the tips. They jabbed at her without mercy, each strike making her flinch and cry out. They laughed, their voices low and cruel, speaking words Elias could not understand, but he could feel the meaning. It was the sound of power over the weak. Elias gripped the edge of the bench, anger boiling in his chest. His fists clenched so tight the skin on his knuckles turned white. He wanted to move, to fight, but there were 4 more guards further down the hall, each armed, each ready, for now all he could do was watch. One of the guards kicked the girl, making her fall against the wall with a dull thud. The other leaned close and said something that made them both laugh. Then they walked away, leaving her shaking on the floor. Elias kept looking at her, his mind racing. He had seen war, he had seen cruelty, but this was something different. This was not a fight. It was the slow breaking of someone who could not fight back. After a long silence, the girl looked up and their eyes met. Her eyes were large, bright, and a strange shade of violet. They seemed to hold a light of their own. For a moment neither spoke, the air between them heavy with something unspoken. Elias took a breath and spoke softly, hoping she might understand. He said his name slowly, pointing to himself. She watched him for a long moment before whispering something, her voice so weak it was almost lost in the hum of the prison lights. She said a single word. It sounded like Lyra. He nodded, repeating it back to her. She seemed surprised. Then she looked away, pulling her knees closer again. Elias wanted to ask more, to know why she was here, but before he could, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. A tall alien in black armor walked past, glancing at Elias with cold eyes before stopping at the girl's cell. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, his shadow covering her as he spoke in that same harsh tongue. She did not answer. The alien grabbed her by the arm and lifted her like she weighed nothing. His claws digging into her skin, she cried out, struggling. But he dragged her to the doorway, turning his head just enough for Elias to see the thin smile on his face. Then the alien said something to the guards, and they all laughed. One of them answered with words that made the others grin even wider. Elias could not understand, but he knew enough from the way they looked at the girl. It was not going to be mercy. They took her down the hall, their footsteps fading into the cold silence. Elias stayed at the bars, staring into the empty cell. Across from him, the small chain she had worn around her ankle still lay on the floor, the metal glinting faintly in the dim light. He sat back down slowly, the bench cold against his skin, the silence pressing in from all sides. Somewhere far away, a scream echoed through the prison, sharp and short, then nothing, Elias closed his eyes. Breathing through his nose, forcing his anger into something hard and steady, he knew one thing. For certain, if he got the chance, he would not let it happen again. The cell block was quiet again, but the quiet in this place was never peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that felt like it was waiting for something bad to happen. The dim blue lights still flickered, and every now and then, the sound of distant metal clanging echoed through the halls, as if the whole prison was alive and shifting in its sleep. Elias sat on the bench with his back against the cold wall, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the empty cell across from him. Hours seemed to pass before the guards returned, dragging Lyra back down the corridor. She was barely able to walk, her head hanging low, her silver glow dim like the last light of a dying star. They pushed her into the cell and locked the door with a heavy click. One of the guards muttered something in their rough language, then spat on the floor before walking away. The others followed, their heavy boots making the ground vibrate until the sound faded into the distance. Elias moved closer to the bars, speaking softly. He said her name again, Lyra, her head lifted just a little, her violet eyes meeting his for a brief moment. Before she turned away, he could see the marks on her arms and neck, thin lines that still shimmered faintly with leftover energy from whatever the aliens had done to her. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice trembling, each word slow, as if speaking was an effort. She told him they had asked her questions. Again, questions she would not answer. He asked why, but she only shook her head, her eyes filling with fear. Elias leaned forward, lowering his voice even more. He told her that he had been a soldier, that he had seen many battles, that he had seen cruelty before, but he had never seen anyone hurt someone so small and defenseless for no reason. She listened without speaking, her breathing shallow. Finally she said something that made the air between them feel heavier. She said the Zirak wanted what she carried in her mind, not in her hands, something that could heal, something that could destroy if twisted the wrong way. Her people had sworn to protect it, even if it cost their lives. Elias understood now why they would not stop until they broke her. He asked her how long she had been here. She did not know. Days felt like weeks in the cold dark. She said they had taken others before her, but none had come back. Her hands shook as she spoke, and Elias noticed the deep shadows under her eyes, the way her voice seemed to fade with every sentence. A sudden noise broke the moment. Heavy steps. Coming down the hall, Elias moved back to his bench, pretending to be resting. A guard appeared, stopping in front of Lyra's cell. He looked at her with a cruel smile and told her in broken human words that tomorrow she would go to the chair again, and this time she would not return. When the guard left, the silence felt sharper, like a knife against the skin. Elias looked at Lyra, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes fixed on the floor. He could feel the weight of the fear in the room. He wanted to tell her it would be all right, but lying felt wrong. Instead he told her something else, something true. He told her humans had a saying, that no cage lasts forever, that even the strongest walls could fall if someone pushed hard enough. Her eyes lifted slightly, but she said nothing. Still, he thought he saw a faint spark behind the fear. Hours passed in the slow crawl of the prison night. The lights dimmed even more, and the constant hum of the power systems grew softer. Elias lay on the bench with his eyes half closed, but his mind stayed sharp, replaying everything he had seen, everything he had heard. He thought of the guard who always stood too close to his cell, the one who kept his keycard in an easy place to reach if someone timed it right. He thought of the hallways he had glimpsed when they first dragged him in, the turns, the doors, the possible way to the hangar or escape pods. A faint sound pulled him from his thoughts. It was Lyra, speaking softly. She asked him why he cared, why he would even speak to her. He told her the truth, that he had seen too many people look away when someone was in pain, and he had promised himself he would not be one of them. For a moment there was silence. Then she told him about her home, a world with silver seas and skies that turned gold. At night, a place where her people used their gifts only to heal, never to harm. Her voice grew softer as she spoke, as if the memory was a comfort and a pain at the same time. Elias listened, and with every word she spoke, his anger grew, not the wild kind that made a man reckless, but the deep kind that settled in the bones, the kind that waited, patient, until the right moment. Far away, a bell rang 3 times, the sound echoing through the prison. It meant the next cycle was beginning. Guards would change, doors would lock again. The night here would last for many more hours. Elias lay back down, closing his eyes just enough to hide the sharpness in them. Tomorrow they would take her to the chair again. Tomorrow might be the last chance to act, and tomorrow, he decided, he would be ready. The next cycle began with the same cold hum that always filled the prison. The lights flickered brighter for a moment before settling into their dim glow. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, slow and heavy. Elias sat up on the bench, his eyes already fixed on Lyra's cell. She was curled against the wall, her silver glow faint, her hair falling across her face like a shadow. 2 guards stopped outside her cell, one unlocking the door with a harsh metallic click. They stepped inside without a word, grabbing her by the arms. She let out a sharp breath, but did not fight. Her thin frame swayed as they pulled her out into the corridor. The sound of her chains dragging against the floor made Elias clench his fists until his knuckles ached. He wanted to move, to act, but the Xeric leader appeared at the far end of the hall, tall and armored in black plates that reflected the faint blue light. His eyes glowed like twin embers, his voice low and sharp as he spoke to the guards. Elias could not understand the words, but the tone told him everything. It was the sound of finality. They marched Lyra down the corridor toward a door Elias had never seen open before. The door slid up with a hiss, revealing a dark room beyond. The light from the corridor spilled in just enough to show the edge of a massive machine. Wires and metal arms hanging from it, like the limbs of some cold and merciless creature. Elias could not see more from his cell, but he could hear. The hum of the machine was low at first, then it grew louder, like the slow rise of a storm. The sound mixed with the faint voice of the Xeric leader, speaking in a steady rhythm, almost like a ritual. Lyra's voice came next, trembling and weak, answering in short bursts. The leader's tone grew sharper. The machine gave a sharp crackle, and she screamed. The sound cut through the cold air like a blade. Elias gripped the bars of his cell so hard the metal dug into his skin. He forced himself to think, not to lose control. Every detail mattered. The guard with the keycard was near, pacing back and forth by the cells, his hand brushing the card clipped to his belt each time. The timing was predictable, the distance close enough if Elias could make the guard step nearer. The machine hummed again, followed by another scream. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound burn into his mind. He had been a soldier. He had seen people break under pain. He knew Lyra could not survive much longer if she gave in, if she told them what they wanted. Whatever was in her mind could be turned into a weapon. He could not let that happen. Minutes passed like hours. Then the sound changed. The hum dropped. The voices grew softer. The leader spoke one last command, and the machine went silent. The door opened again. The guards dragged Lyra out, her body limp, her head falling forward, her silver glow now barely a faint shimmer in the shadows. They pushed her back into her cell and locked the door. One of them laughed in a low rumble, saying something to Elias in broken human words. Tomorrow she break, human. Then they walked away, their boots thudding against the floor until the sound was swallowed by the distance. Elias moved to the bars, speaking softly, calling her name. She stirred slightly, her eyes opening just enough to see him. Her lips moved but no sound came. She was too weak, too drained. He told her to hold on, that this was not the end. She blinked once in slow understanding before closing her eyes again. The rest of the cycle was filled with silence, broken only by the faint hiss of air moving through the vents. Elias sat back on the bench, his mind running through the possibilities, the guard's pattern, the distance to the torture room, the number of turns in the hallway, the placement of the doors. Each detail was a piece of a map forming in his head. He knew he could not fight all of them, but he did not need to fight all of them. He needed only to strike at the right moment, to move fast and take the one chance he would get. Once they took her to the chair again, there would be no more chances. As the hours passed, he heard small noises from Lyra's cell, a faint cough, the soft scrape of her chains against the floor. It was enough to remind him that she was still alive, still there, still worth saving. He thought of her silver glow, her violet eyes, and the way she had spoken of her home. The image of the machine stayed in his mind. Wires like claws, the hum like a predator breathing. He could almost feel its cold presence even now. And with it came the quiet certainty that tomorrow he would face it. Not from a cell, but from inside that room. When the next guard change came, Elias pretended to sleep, but he marked the sound of their steps, the order in which they passed, the time it took before the hall was clear again. Every second counted. Every second was part of what would come. In the heavy silence after the guards left, Elias opened his eyes, his gaze steady on the shadowed corridor. Tomorrow the chair would hum again. Tomorrow they would try to break her again, but tomorrow he would be ready to break them instead. The cold light of the new cycle spilled into the cell block, the same pale blue glow that made the black stone walls look wet and alive. Elias sat on the bench with his back straight, his eyes sharp. He had barely slept. Every moment of the night had been spent building a plan in his mind. The plan was dangerous, but it was the only way. Across the hall, Lyra was curled against the wall, her silver glow faint but still there. She looked weaker than before, yet her eyes followed him as if she knew he was thinking of something. Her gaze was steady, even though her body trembled from the cold and pain. The guard with the keycard appeared, his boots clicking against the metal floor. He walked past Elias's cell the same way he always did, the card swinging slightly at his belt, close enough that with the right timing Elias could reach it. But not yet. He had to wait for the right moment. Two other guards stood by the far door, speaking in low voices, their alien language sharp and quick. Elias watched them out of the corner of his eye, waiting for them to look away. The minutes stretched, each one louder in his mind than the last. Then came the sound he had been waiting for, the alarm that marked the start of the prisoner transfer. It was not loud, but in this place, it meant movement. It meant doors opening and closing. It meant guards distracted. Elias leaned back, pretending to adjust his position. When the guard passed again, Elias moved, his hand shooting out between the bars, grabbing the guard's wrist and pulling hard. The guard stumbled forward, his other hand going for his weapon. But Elias's grip was too strong. With his free hand, Elias snatched the keycard from the belt, tucking it quickly into his sleeve before letting go. The guard cursed in his rough language, stepping back and glaring, but he did not raise the alarm. Instead, he muttered something and walked away, unaware the card was gone. Elias sat back on the bench, forcing himself to breathe slowly, to act as if nothing had happened. He waited until the footsteps faded. Then he glanced at Lyra. She had seen it. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of hope crossing her face before she lowered her head again, hiding it from any watching eyes. The rest of the cycle passed in a tense stillness. Every sound in the corridor felt louder, every shadow sharper. Elias kept his gaze fixed on the door at the far end, the one that led deeper into the prison. He knew the torture room lay beyond it, and he knew that once the guards took her there again, she would not come back. When the shift change came, Elias moved, sliding the card from his sleeve and holding it low. The sound of boots grew faint as the guards left their posts. The blue light dimmed slightly as the power shifted. Elias stood, his steps silent as he moved to the cell door. He slid the card through the slot. The lock gave a quiet click. The door eased open, cold air spilling in from the corridor. He stepped out, keeping low, his eyes scanning the hall for movement. Lyra watched him, her eyes wide. He crossed to her cell, sliding the card through again. The door unlocked. She pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. He caught her before she fell, her chains heavy and cold against his arms. He whispered to her to stay quiet. They moved quickly, Elias guiding her toward the far end of the hall, the card working on each locked door they passed. Strange alien symbols glowed faintly along the walls. The air smelled of oil and burning metal. At one corner they heard voices approaching. Elias pulled her into a shadow. Pressing against the wall, two guards walked past, speaking in low tones, their weapons resting against their shoulders. They did not look in their direction. The faint hum of machinery covered the sound of their breathing. They kept moving, passing a row of strange round doors, each marked with glowing red symbols. Elias did not stop to look. The hall turned sharply, leading to a wider corridor with heavier doors. He knew they were getting closer to the torture room. The sound of the machine reached them, a low, steady hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor. Lyra stiffened, her hands clenching around his arm. He whispered that they would not reach it this time, that they were going somewhere else. At the far end of the corridor he saw it, a side passage with a sign marked in alien script, but also a small symbol he recognized. The universal sign for an emergency escape, the kind used in space stations and ships. They hurried toward it, the card unlocking the heavy door. Inside was a narrow staircase leading down, the air colder here, the walls lined with pipes and cables, the faint sound of alarms somewhere far above. Halfway down, a sudden voice rang out behind them, sharp and angry. Elias turned to see one of the guards at the top of the stairs. Weapon raised, he shoved Lyra ahead of him, telling her to run. The guard fired, the blast hitting the wall near Elias's head. Sparks flying. Elias grabbed a loose length of chain from around his neck, throwing it with all his strength. It struck the guard's weapon, knocking it aside for a moment, enough time for Elias to follow Lyra down the stairs, the sound of boots pounding behind them. They reached the bottom and found another heavy door. The card slid through, the lock clicked, the door opened to a dimly lit service tunnel, air rushing past them from somewhere ahead. They ran, the tunnel stretching long and straight, behind them. The sound of pursuit grew louder. Elias glanced back, the glow of alien armor catching the light. He pushed Lyra forward, his voice steady but urgent, telling her not to stop. Somewhere ahead, the tunnel curved upward, the faint light of an exit spilling down. He knew they were close, but so were the ones chasing them, and there would be no second chance. The air in the service tunnel was colder now, rushing past them with every step. The sound of pursuit echoed behind, heavy boots pounding against the metal floor. Elias kept his arm around Lyra to steady her, her chains clinking with each step, her breath coming fast and shallow. The tunnel curved upward, the faint light of an exit spilling down toward them, but between them and freedom stood two Zirek guards, each holding long spears tipped with glowing blue energy. Their armor was thicker than the others. Their eyes locked on Elias and Lyra with cold focus. They moved forward without hesitation, blocking the way, the hum of the spear tips filling the air with a sharp electric sound. Elias stepped in front of Lyra, his eyes scanning for an opening, his fists clenched, his heartbeat loud in his ears. The first guard lunged, the spear striking toward Elias's chest. He sidestepped, the tip grazing his shoulder, sending a jolt of pain through his arm. He grabbed the shaft of the spear with both hands, twisting hard. The guard tried to pull it back, but Elias drove his knee into the alien's midsection, forcing him to stumble. The second guard came at him fast, swinging the spear in a wide arc. Elias ducked low, the weapon slicing the air above his head. He saw his chance and yanked the first guard forward, slamming him into the second. The two armored bodies crashed together, their weapons clanging against the tunnel walls. Lyra stood back, her eyes wide, clutching the chain around her wrists. Elias shouted for her to move toward the exit, but she hesitated, seeing one of the guards recover. The alien roared and swung his spear again. Elias blocked with his arm, pain shooting up to his shoulder. He gritted his teeth and pushed back, twisting the weapon from the alien's grip. Now holding the spear, Elias turned it toward its former owner, driving the crackling tip into the alien's chest plate. The impact sent a surge of blue light through the armor. The alien convulsed and dropped to the floor. The second guard roared in fury, rushing Elias with bare claws. Elias spun the spear and thrust it forward, but the guard slapped it aside and grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Elias's vision blurred, the pressure crushing his windpipe. He kicked out, striking the alien's knee. The guard grunted but did not release him. Then a flash of silver light filled the tunnel. Lyra had stepped forward, her hands glowing faintly despite the chains. The light flared brighter, striking the guard's head. The alien cried out, dropping Elias to the floor, clutching his face as smoke rose from the edges of his armor. Elias did not waste the moment. He grabbed the fallen spear and drove it into the guard's side. The weapon sparking as it pierced the armor, the guard collapsed with a heavy thud, the tunnel falling silent except for the sound of their breathing. Elias looked at Lyra, her glow fading quickly, her body swaying. He caught her before she fell, her voice barely a whisper as she told him they had to keep moving. He nodded, helping her toward the exit. They stepped out into a larger chamber, pipes running along the walls, steam hissing from vents in short bursts. The floor vibrated with the hum of engines somewhere below. At the far end was a thick door marked with alien symbols. Beside it a control panel with glowing buttons. Elias moved to the panel, sliding the stolen keycard through the slot. The panel beeped, and the door unlocked with a slow grinding sound. But before it could fully open, a sharp alarm blared, red lights flashing across the chamber, the sound of more boots pounding in the distance. Lyra looked at him, fear in her eyes, but Elias smiled faintly, telling her they had come too far to turn back. He pushed the door open enough for her to slip through, following close behind. Beyond was another corridor, narrower and darker, lit only by thin strips of red light along the floor. They moved quickly, the alarm still wailing behind them. The sound of pursuit growing closer. Elias could hear voices shouting orders in the Xeric language. The corridor opened into a docking bay, the vast space lined with alien ships of various shapes and sizes. The air smelled of fuel and hot metal. Workers in dark uniforms ran for cover as the alarm echoed through the bay. Elias's eyes locked on a small craft near the far wall, just large enough for two. They ran for it, but before they could reach it, a squad of 4 armed Xeric soldiers stepped into their path. Rifles raised, their glowing sights fixed on Elias and Lyra. Elias slowed, his mind racing. He could fight them. But not all at once. Lyra looked at him, her hands trembling. She told him she could distract them, just for a moment, but it would take what little strength she had left. Elias hesitated, then nodded. She stepped forward, closing her eyes, her silver glow returning, brighter this time, flaring in sharp bursts of light. The soldiers staggered, shielding their eyes. Elias charged forward, grabbing the nearest one and slamming him into another. Their weapons clattering to the floor, he kicked one rifle away, swung the butt of another into a third soldier's face, and drove his fist into the fourth's throat. One of the soldiers managed to grab Elias's arm. Twisting hard, Elias countered with a sharp elbow to the jaw. The alien stumbled back. Elias snatched a fallen rifle, firing a burst into the wall above the soldiers to drive them to cover. He turned to see Lyra swaying again, her glow fading. He grabbed her and pulled her toward the small ship, the sound of more soldiers entering the bay echoing through the air. They climbed into the cockpit, Elias slamming the hatch shut, his hands flying over the controls as the engines roared to life. The bay door ahead began to close. He pushed the throttle, the ship lifting from the ground, speeding forward toward the narrowing gap. Red light washing over the cockpit, the space beyond cold and endless. The ship shot through just before the door sealed shut, the alarms fading behind them, leaving only the sound of the engines and the vast silence of space. But Elias knew it was not over. Not yet. The ship's engines burned bright against the darkness as Elias gripped the controls, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead but his ears catching the faint beeps of the radar, the signal warning that something was coming fast from behind. Lyra sat beside him, still weak, her breathing slow, her gaze unfocused, yet she tried to sit upright, the silver glow in her skin almost gone. Elias flicked a switch and the radar screen lit up with 3 red blips, growing larger with each passing second. He muttered that they had been tracked already. The Xerec ships were closing in from behind, moving faster than his stolen craft could go. The silence of space was broken only by the hum of the ship's core and the soft tremor of the hull, but soon the darkness lit with sharp bursts of blue light as enemy fire streaked past their side, each blast shaking the small vessel. Lyra gripped the seat, her eyes wide as the shockwaves rattled her bones. Elias pulled the craft into a steep roll, dodging the next barrage of fire, the stars spinning wildly outside the glass. He darted between chunks of drifting rock, the remains of some ancient asteroid field, jagged edges spinning slowly in the black void. The enemy ships followed, weaving through the debris with frightening precision, their weapons firing in bursts, trying to pin Elias into a corner where escape would be impossible. Large shard of rock tumbled toward them. Elias tilted the ship hard, sliding beneath it, so close he could see the fine cracks across its frozen surface. The Xerec behind fired again, the blast striking the asteroid and sending smaller shards spinning in all directions. Elias swerved between them, but one fragment scraped the hull with a harsh metallic shriek. Lyra leaned toward the control panel, her fingers trembling. She told Elias there was a way to blind the pursuers, at least for a moment. She pointed to a switch near the side console, explaining it would release a burst of heated gas from the rear vents. Elias did not ask questions. He hit the switch, and a cloud of shimmering vapor erupted behind them, filling the space with a glowing mist. The pursuing ships hesitated, their sensors momentarily confused. Elias seized the chance, pushing the throttle to its limit. The craft surged forward, its engines roaring, but the radar still showed the red blips returning to formation, their speed increasing as they closed the gap once more. A voice crackled through the comm system, cold and sharp, speaking in the Xerec tongue, though Elias could catch the meaning. They were demanding surrender, promising a swift end if they resisted. Elias shut the channel without a word, focusing instead on the jagged path ahead where the asteroid field thinned and opened into a vast expanse. But that expanse was not empty. It held the shadow of a massive derelict vessel, its hull torn and hollow, drifting in the endless dark, its size dwarfing even the largest Xerec ships. Elias angled toward it. Lyra looked at him in question, but he only said that big wrecks made good hiding spots if you were desperate enough. They slipped into one of the gaping holes in the derelict's side, the darkness swallowing them whole. Elias cut the main engines, letting the ship drift silently through the twisted remains, broken corridors, and shattered walls, sliding past outside the glass. The Xerec ships slowed outside, scanning the wreck, searching for heat or movement. Elias kept them hidden in the maze of metal, drifting deeper into the wreck's hollow core, the silence so heavy they could hear the faint creak of the derelict's own slow turning in space. But then the radar flickered, the red blips splitting apart. One of the Xerec ships had entered the wreck. Blue light flared ahead as the pursuing craft's search beams cut through the dark. Elias took a sharp turn down a side passage, the walls narrowing so close that the wingtips almost scraped against them. The enemy beam passed by, but another came from behind, flooding the cockpit with cold light. Elias pushed forward, weaving through debris, fallen beams, and floating scraps of metal. Suddenly, a violent jolt threw them sideways, the ship scraping against a sharp edge. Elias fought to steady the controls, alarms flashing red across the panel. Lyra reached over, shutting down non-essential systems to reduce their heat signature. The cockpit dimmed, leaving only the faint glow of emergency lights. The enemy ship passed overhead without stopping, its scanners sweeping the wreck. Elias waited, holding the ship steady, not daring to move. Lyra's eyes locked on the radar, the blips circling slowly, then one by one they pulled away. Retreating toward open space, Elias let out a long breath, but before he could start the engines, a faint beeping from the side panel caught his attention. Lyra leaned closer, her eyes widening. It was a tracker hidden inside the stolen ship they had. Not escaped at all, the Zirek could still follow them anywhere. Elias's jaw tightened. He told her they would have to remove it, and quickly, but doing so would mean stepping outside into the wreck itself. Lyra tried to stand but stumbled, still weak. Elias caught her, helping her to the small rear hatch. He suited up, pulling a helmet over his head, the faceplate glowing faintly as systems activated. With a hiss, the hatch opened, revealing the silent expanse of the wreck stretching into darkness. Elias stepped out, boots clicking against the twisted hull, the stars distant and cold beyond the broken metal. He moved along the underside of the craft, scanning with his visor until a faint red blink caught his eye, tucked between the engine vents. Reached for it, but a shadow moved across the wreck above the glow of an engine flare. Touching the edges of the torn metal, one of the Zirek ships had returned, moving slowly as if stalking prey. Elias yanked the tracker free, tucking it into his suit, and without thinking hurled it into the far side of the wreck, where it bounced away into the dark. The red light still blinking, the pursuing ship veered toward the decoy, chasing the signal. Elias turned and sprinted back to the hatch, slipping inside as the engines roared to life again. They shot out of the wreck into open space once more, the stars stretching ahead. Elias knew the chase would not end here, but at least for now they had one step of breathing room before the hunt began again. Cold void stretched forever, yet Elias felt the walls closing in, as if the stars themselves were drawing nearer. Each breath inside his helmet sounded too loud and too fast. Lyra sat strapped into her seat, her eyes on the faint shimmer in the distance, where the Zirek fleet now gathered, their long dark shapes cutting across the glow of a distant sun, their weapons ready and their engines burning bright. Elias knew they had been found again. The stolen ship was shaking under the strain of full speed, the metal groaning in protest. He checked the readings and saw the Zirek were no longer chasing in single ships. They had formed a net, a trap that would close around them from all sides. Lyra placed her hand on his arm and said there was no way to outrun them now. They would have to fight, or they would both be taken again, and this time there would be no chance of escape. Elias stared at the controls, his jaw tight. He had never planned to fight a whole fleet, yet something in her voice told him she was ready to stand with him, even in the face of certain death. He scanned the space ahead, searching for anything that could help them. The radar showed a large field of drifting ice and rock, not far away, the kind that could hide a small craft for a short time if used with skill. Elias angled toward it, the engine straining as the Zirek ships drew closer, beams of blue light already cutting through the darkness behind them. First blast struck the ice field, sending chunks of frozen rock spinning past their ship. Elias swerved between them, using the largest pieces as cover. The enemy fire exploded against the ice, sending bright clouds of frozen dust into space. The hull shook again as a blast skimmed their side. Lyra was gripping the seat so hard her knuckles were pale. He told her to go to the weapons console and aim for the lead ship, the one giving orders. She hesitated only a moment, then her fingers moved across the old panel, activating systems that had not been used in years. The hum of charged energy filled the cockpit as the ship's cannons powered up. Elias rolled the ship into a narrow gap between two massive icebergs, their jagged edges gleaming in the distant light. The Zirek followed, but their formation was breaking as the ice field forced them apart. Elias fired the rear thrusters, spinning the ship to face the enemy head on. The blue glow of their engines flaring bright against the darkness. The first volley of fire from Lyra struck the lid ship's shields, making them ripple like water. Another shot punched through, leaving a burst of white flame in its side. Enemy returned fire in a storm of light beams tearing through the space around them. Elias twisted the ship to avoid the worst, but one blast clipped the wing, sending a deep shudder through the frame. Alarms blared in the cockpit, red lights flashing across the panels, smoke filling the air. Lyra coughed but did not stop firing, each shot aimed with desperate precision. One Xerx's ship spun out of control, colliding with a block of ice and bursting into a cloud of debris. The explosion lighting the field in bright orange. For a brief moment, Elias pushed forward, weaving between the spinning remains as more enemy ships closed in from both sides. He knew they would be surrounded in seconds, unless he did something reckless. His eyes flicked to the reactor readout, and he made the decision in silence. He cut power to all non-essential systems, rerouting everything to the forward weapons and the engines. Lyra looked at him confused, but he only said they were going to break the net or die. Trying, the ship shot forward at a speed that strained every bolt in its frame, the ice flashing past in a blur. The enemy ships scrambled to adjust, but Elias kept the course straight toward the narrowest gap between two of them. Lyra fired again, hitting one ship's wing and sending it spinning. The gap widened, just enough for their craft to slip through as enemy fire tore past, missing by only meters. They broke free of the ice field, and the stars opened around them again, but the fleet was still behind, still chasing. Elias knew there was no safe place left to run. Only one choice remained. He angled the ship toward a small, unstable moon on the edge of the system, its surface cracked and glowing faintly from volcanic heat. If they could lure the fleet close enough, the unstable crust might do the rest. They skimmed low over the moon's jagged surface, the heat alarms blaring, the thin plumes of fire rising from the cracks below. Elias led the fleet into a deep canyon between two ridges, the enemy ships following in tight formation, unaware of the danger ahead. At the last moment, Elias pulled the ship up and out of the canyon, shouting for Lyra to fire everything they had into the ridge wall. The cannons roared, sending blasts into the unstable rock. The wall cracked, and then the entire side of the ridge collapsed in a wave of molten stone and dust, swallowing the canyon in a glowing tide. The Xerx ships inside had no time to escape the blast. Their hulls melted in the heat, their engines torn apart by the avalanche of fire and rock. The comms were filled with static, and then silence. The radar showed nothing but the fading heat of destruction. Elias let the ship drift in the empty sky above the ruined moon, his hands finally relaxing on the controls. Lyra leaned back in her seat, breathing hard, the silver glow slowly returning to her skin. For the first time since he had met her, they had survived the net, the chase, and the last stand, but both of them knew the war was far from over. Somewhere beyond the stars, the Xerx still ruled, and one day they would return, and when they did, human who dared to save her would be ready again.